Well, good evening and welcome to the Howard University School of Divinity. It is certainly my delight and privilege to welcome you to this inaugural faculty-student colloquium. I am so excited that we are launching what is to become an integral part of the teaching and learning experience here at the Divinity School. So just to give you a little background, last semester, under the leadership of Dr. Renee Harrison, the faculty voted in full support of launching this new colloquium, and we are delighted now that we can actually put some meat to the skeleton and the plans that we have been deliberating upon for the past several months. The purpose of this colloquium is threefold. First of all, we are here to celebrate, showcase, and nurture faculty's research and writing. We're also here to inspire students to make stronger connections between their faith, their academic life, and the world around them. And the third purpose for this series is to provide a venue for exchanging provocative and innovative ideas with those working directly in the public square. So as you can see from the panelists seated to my left, we definitely have a rich opportunity to engage the public square on this evening. So tonight we will have a lecture by Dr. Frederick Ware, who will be speaking on the topic, Democracy and the Beloved Community. And we have a panel of respondents who will offer insights and suggestions for how Dr. Ware's work is relevant for the role and future of the Black church in American pluralist society. So at this moment, I want to thank Congressman Scott, Reverend Slayton, and also Ms. Bywaters, who will be introduced later, for joining us on this evening. But at this point now, it is important that I introduce the moderator for this occasion, who will bring us more background information on our speakers and facilitate what I hope to be a rich conversation that we will have on this evening. Our moderator is Dr. Renee K. Harrison, who is Assistant Professor of African American and U.S. Religious History here at the Divinity School. She joined the faculty in the fall of 2010, having previously served at Payne Theological Seminary in Wilberforce, Ohio, and as visiting professor at the Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Harrison is a well-published scholar among us. She's the author of Enslaved Women and the Art of Resistance in Antebellum America, published in 2009. And she's currently working on a project titled Black Hands, White House, the enslaved community that built the American Capitol. And this work delves into the legacy and voices of former enslaved Africans who built this nation's capital. So a part of what we're doing here and why we're here is to showcase our faculty. So you will hear fully from Dr. Ware tonight, but we have a whole lineup of faculty who have generated ground-shaking scholarship. And so over the different months and semesters as we showcase these different faculty-student colloquiums, you'll have an opportunity to learn more about the rich scholarship that our faculty is engaged in. So at this moment then, I will turn the floor over to Dr. Harrison, who will give further introductions as to why we are here. And I just want to say that I appreciate so much your commitment to supporting the Divinity School and this program being sponsored by the Office of Academic Affairs. It is my delight to serve as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, and at this time welcome you to this colloquium for this evening. Dr. Harrison.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
That's better. I'm excited that you're here because you could be anywhere and you make this choice. So I'm glad that this is the choice you made tonight. I can remember when I was at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and the scholars I was reading about, among them was Dr. Ware, Dr. Sanders, Dr. Cahill-Felder, and on and on and on and on, and Dr. Hobson. I could just keep going on and on and on. And it was those scholars that made me want to consider, because I took the idea of a black academic as normative, and I realized that we represent not even 5% of the scholarship population of those with doctoral degrees. So when I came here, all that I could conceive of was the idea of hearing the people I read about speak. So we began tonight with Dr. Ware, and the best way I can describe Dr. Ware is that he is indeed a gentle spirit with a giant mind. Dr. Frederick Ware is Associate Professor of Theology. He joined the faculty in August 2003. Prior to his service at Howard, Dr. Ware taught at Stillman College in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Memphis Theological Seminary and Christian Brothers University in Memphis, Tennessee. He also has held teaching and administrative positions in the C.H. Mason Bible College and All Saints Bible College in Memphis. Dr. Ware earned his MDiv degree and subsequent PhD degree in religion with a concentration in theological studies from Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. He received a BA and an MA degree in philosophy from the University of Memphis. Dr. Ware is an ordained minister in the Church of God in Christ. Presently, he is a member of St. Paul Temple Church of God in Christ here in Washington, D.C., where Bishop Coles is interim pastor and prelude to Washington, D.C. jurisdiction. He is author of Methodologies of Black Theology. Dr. Ware has published several essays in African American theology. His work also explores the intersections of Pentecostalism with race, culture, healthcare, and discourse on the religion and science debate. Dr. Ware and his wife Sheila, a dental administrator, has two daughters, Kayla, who is a first-year student at the University of Memphis, and Megan, who is a junior at Martin Luther King Junior High School. Let us welcome your lecturer on tonight. You can clap. I will interject and say I remember again, as a student and a faculty member, listening to these long bios, and I would go, really? But what I find to be so intriguing, that it speaks of a person's body of work, that they didn't just happen into this space, but they're here as a result of the work and the work ethic that they put into mining through the field of discourse so that they can engage us in these settings today. So with that in mind, in the public square, we are grateful to have as our first respondent Congressman Robert C. Bobby Scott of 3rd District of Virginia. You know, there's a saying that the old folks used to say, a wise man listens to his conscience. Well, thank you, Congressman, for listening. Your comprehensive, evidence-based approaches to gun violence are not just mere sound bites and empty rhetoric. You are an advocate who understands the intersections of what's happening on the ground and the importance of public policy. So we thank you for listening and for being here tonight. Now, how is what I just said true? Listen to this body of work. Recently, Congressman Scott was appointed a vice chair of the Congressional Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, and with him here today is Ashley McDonald. She's a counsel to the Crime Subcommittee. Say hi to Ashley. Say hi. And the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force is a task force established by Nancy Pelosi after the Newtown tragedy to investigate steps Congress could take to reduce gun violence. However, prior to this appointment, Congressman Scott has worked tirelessly in this area, co-sponsoring a range of firearm and weapon legislations. He also serves as the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security. He is a known leader of legislative efforts to reduce crime and prevent youth violence. Following the Columbine tragedy, he co-led a bipartisan effort to develop juvenile crime prevention and accountability legislation that resulted in the Juvenile Accountability Block Grant Program legislation, which was co-sponsored by every member of the crime subcommittee and passed into law in 2002. He has also led a bipartisan legislative efforts to add fines and suspensions to enable the ATF to enforce more effective gun sale and transfer regulations, and he has worked to close the gun show loophole. He has sponsored the Campus Safety Act, which would create a National Center for Campus Public Safety at the Department of Justice, and he has also introduced the Youth Promise Act, which is part of his focus here tonight. Now let me pause just for a moment and put Congressman Scott's tenure into a historical perspective. He is currently serving his 11th term in Congress. Prior to serving in the U.S. House of Representatives, he served in the Virginia House of Delegates from 1978 to 1983, and in the Senate of Virginia from 1983 to 1993. In November 1992, Congressman Scott was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, making history as the first African-American elected to Congress from the Commonwealth of Virginia since Reconstruction. And the only second African-American elected to Congress in Virginia's history. Having a maternal grandfather of Filipino ancestry also gives Congressman Scott the distinction of being the first American with Filipino ancestry to serve as a voting member of Congress. We welcome you, Congressman Scott. Now, this empty chair that you see is not a Clint Eastwood moment, I guarantee you. But rather, I want you to see this as an ancestral moment, the way in which we as a community acknowledge the presence of someone, even though they are not physically here. And with that in mind, I would just like us to take just a moment of silence after I shape the context by which Sia Price is not here. She is in the hospital. She's in great pain. And Sia called me and said, Dr. Harrison, I'm so sorry. I can't do it. I don't think I'll be able to do it, but I have my paper. And I would like my paper to be inserted into the conversation. Now, she did not have her paper at the time that she said that to me. She spent the night last night in the hospital, in pain, typing a paper on her mother's iPad. So, I want us to take just a moment of silence, of well wishes and healing, but then also quiet reflection of work ethic. Thank you. Now, because Sia's paper will be heard in this form, I want to just take a moment to give you some sense of who she is. I will not read her full bio, but just a sense of who is actually responding to Dr. Ware's paper and also in conversation with our respondents. Born and raised in Newport News, Virginia, Marcia, which we know and love as Sia Price, received her BA in philosophy from Spelman College and her MA in religious studies from Howard University School of Divinity. Sia is currently pursuing her Master's in Divinity here at Howard with an interest in the intersection of theology and public policy. Sia has worked in public policy and politics on various levels with Congressman Robert C. Bobby Scott, Governor Mark Warner, and Newport News Mayor McKinley Price. In the summer of 2012, she worked as the state organizer for the NAACP This Is My Vote campaign focusing on voters' registration, education, mobilization to fight attempts to fight voter suppression. Now, let me stress here that Sia was not selected to serve on this panel as a student representative because of her connections. Sia was selected because of her work ethic, her disciplined mind, and integrity and commitment to her studies. When I said to Dr. Ware to identify a student he would like to respond to his lecture on tonight, he said without pause what I was already thinking, Sia Price. So to all the students here tonight, I want you to just imagine yourself in that chair, because we're going to do this again, and the next one we're going to do in the coming months is going to be featuring Dr. Ron Hobson. Will you stand? And one of you in this room or beyond this room will be the respondent to Dr. Hobson's lecture, but it will be work ethic that will get you to that seat. With work ethic in mind, I want to call Kamilah Bywaters to the Now, so here's the story. I feel like here's the story. Okay. So when I got the message from Sia this morning, and I went to Dr. Ware and Dr. Love. Dr. Love's the counselor. So, we thought about how to present Sia's body of work, and it was important to have a student read a student's work. So Kamilah, without hesitation, hours notice, came into Dr. Love's office, read through Sia's work, made the corrections, went home, changed her clothes, took a shower, and she's ready to go. Kamilah Bywaters is a native of Las Vegas, Nevada. Ms. Bywaters started her journey at Howard University in 2001 as an undergraduate, where she received her Bachelor of Science degree in psychology. Ms. Bywaters continued her education at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where she received a Master's in Education. After 5 years of dedication as a special education teacher, Ms. Bywaters decided to pursue her studies full-time at Howard Divinity. She is currently in her second year of the MDiv program and serves as the graduate assistant for the Andrew Rankin Memorial Chapel. Ms. Bywaters enjoys serving the USD community and the broader community, and we say to you, thank you for being here. Well, our last respondent is Reverend Kevin A. Slayton Sr., and we welcome you. Your enthusiasm, I didn't just make this stuff up, it's real. Your enthusiasm as an alumnus to return to one of the well springs of your vocational musings says a lot about your commitment to pay back in order for us to learn how to pay forward. So we thank you for being here today. Reverend Slayton received his BS degree in finance and economics at Alabama A&E University in Huntsville, Alabama, and continued his graduate education at the University of Tennessee in public administration. Reverend Slayton later pursued a graduate degree in African American Studies at Morgan State University and received his Master's of Divinity in Theological Studies from Howard. Currently, Reverend Slayton is a doctoral candidate in Public Policy Administration program at the University of Baltimore. He was ordained at the Douglas Memorial Community Church and served as an associate member of Social Justice. Currently, he is assistant pastor of Heritage United Church of Christ in Baltimore, Maryland. Reverend Slayton has interned with the NAACP and the U.S. Senator Bill Fisk. He is the Religious Affairs Advisor to the Mayor of Baltimore, and prior to his position, he worked as a civil rights lobbyist in Maryland for his own firm called the Slayton Group, LLC. He has served as Public Policy Director for the Public Justice Center and Program Officer for Associated Black Charities. Over the past few years, he has played major lobbying roles in the passage of bills such as the increase in minimum wage and the Medicaid restoration for pregnant women and children. He was instrumental in altering the Baltimore City public school system's school board appointment process as the chair of the Parent and Community Advisory Board, and he recently completed his appointment as vice president of the Baltimore City Board elections. Reverend Slayton is a member of, let me say it before you lose it. Reverend Slayton is a member of the Kappa Psi fraternity and most proud of receiving the Distinguished Parent of the Year award 3 years in a row from the Gwynn Falls Little League Football Association. He is a proud father of 3 children, Kevin, Kamilah, and Kamilah. Thank you for being here. Let's give a warm applause.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I want to first, if you allow me, I know my time is limited, but I want to just acknowledge some persons I think who are very connected to what we're doing here on this evening. The students that enrolled in the pilot course and the first offering of the Theology seminar on democracy, I want to just acknowledge those students and the titles of their term papers. It was a great opportunity for me, all of us, to learn quite a bit during the seminar. I have been working and studying on the topic for 3 years and was very happy that I had an opportunity to share my research through the course with these students. Viola Bradford worked on a paper, Moral Pluralism in American Democracy, an examination of 4 Christian perspectives on same-sex marriage. In addition to the term paper, Ms. Bradford also conducted an ethnographic study of a congregation consisting of observation of democratic practices in a congregational setting, examination of the congregation's biblical and theological justification of its democratic values and practices, and assessment of the operative model of democracy in that congregation. A lot of work was done during that semester. Paula Hall presented a paper, worked on a paper, American Millennial Visions of Recovery from the Great Recession. And Marcia Price wrote a term paper that was quite timely. Good Christians, Good Citizens, a framework for action in African American churches responds to violence against children. I also want to acknowledge some members from St. Paul Temple, and I have the great privilege of worshiping with them and working with them. I saw 2 members when I first came in, and if there's any others, then bring that to my attention. But Deidre Greenlee and Reverend Carlton Crew, just raise your hand. Okay. I'm thankful to our community, our deans, our faculty, our staff, our students, our alumni, and the friends of Howard University School of Divinity. And I thank Dr. Harrison and others who were involved in organizing and planning for this colloquium. I want to just say one more thing, and that's just a housekeeping measure. The students in systematic theology, make sure that you sign the attendance sheet before you leave. The title of my paper is Democracy in Beloved Community. The subtitle, Ideals for Shaping the Role and Future of the Black Church in American Pluralist Society. I preface my lecture with 2 comments. The first comment is an explanation for why I'm taking a theological approach. Certainly you would expect that I, as a professor of theology, will say something that's theological. Beyond the obvious, I need to tell you what theology is and why theology matters in our discussions about public policy, about public life. which is not always overtly religious. Properly understood, theology is not mere opinion. Theology operates from the given. Theology is an attempt to understand Christian belief as it is, not for or from what we would like it to be. In light of the deep divisions not only between American citizens in general, but also between those Americans professing to be Christians, there must be a common basis, a given, if you will, that brings all Christians into an accountability for their speech and actions. Political strategy and policy are open to compromise, but the given is not. Theology articulates this given. The second comment is an explanation of my selection of democracy and beloved community as the principal ideals for the structuring of Christianity in general and for the Black church in particular. Religion, politics, and culture are woven together in Christianity. Christianity is a religion in pursuit, ultimately, of community. As an innovation in social practice and a form of government, democracy is a tool for achieving the type of community that's envisioned in Christianity. The conditions of all cultural life depend on political institutions, that is to say, the ways in which humans organize their societies for the negotiation of the varied and sometimes competing interests, has the consequence of their either enhancing or diminishing their culture. The aim of culture is to facilitate humans' adaptation to their environment and thus their survival and quality of life. In view of the importance and necessity of political institutions, it makes sense that Christianity focuses on the kingdom of God, a concept with implications for politics, for the fulfillment of human life, and for defining what genuine community and even what the church should be. The question addressed in this lecture is, what does or should vibrant religion, relevant religion, especially Black Christian faith, look like in the 21st century? That is to say, in our present moment in history. The present moment in history, which is discussed later in the lecture as our context and crisis, is the unique set of opportunities and challenges posed by the current form of pluralism in the United States and in our world. Now, this is a different type of question than asking, is the Black church dead? Maybe in our discussions we'll be able to say a little bit more about that. But my answer to the question that I have posed is threefold. If Christianity, Black Christian faith, is to thrive presently and into the future, it must focus, plan, and assess all of its endeavors in every area of social and cultural life on the principles of renewal, moral formation, and beloved community. In addition to the critique of how I'm defining and interrelating these terms and concepts for my application to ministry and social activism, another important test of the plausibility of my answer will be whether I am making sufficient space for young people to offer new ideas and to assume leadership towards improving human life in the United States and around the world. The youth are those persons present with us here on today, but who will inherit, for better or worse, but hopefully for the better, the church and society that we bequeath to tomorrow. Effective and responsible solutions cannot be short-term only. They must be long-term. And I hope that this is something that makes space for young people to contribute. Concise definitions of the key terms are provided in the outline that you received. And since you have the definitions before you, I won't recite them. But I want to make a point of clarification. Democracy is not one and the same with beloved community. They're two separate things. The terms are distinct, but they're interdependent. Beloved community is of central importance in Christianity and has always had some influence on persons' social behavior. Democracy may reinforce the ideals of beloved community, in particular those ideals of freedom, equality, partnership, and justice in beloved community. The term beloved community itself was popularized by Martin Luther King Jr. in his sermons and his speeches and writings. And the term even appears in the mission statement of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that he led. But the term was first coined by Josiah Royce. And so in my research about writing, I go back and forth between these two thinkers in exploring this idea of beloved community. By the use of the adjective beloved, Royce is emphasizing individuals' loyalty, devotion to community, love of community, and search for community. Beloved community is universal community in the sense of, first of all, the inclusion and affirmation of all persons. And secondly, an ideal and objective that is relevant to all human societies at any time in history. Humans are not content to merely exist in a group, but want to live life in that group with a certain quality of relationships. For both Royce and King, beloved community is the ultimate goal of human life, all human striving, the creation of an inclusive community where all persons are able to develop and realize their potential. According to Royce, beloved community has the capacity to breed patterns and networks of organization in society well beyond the church from where it begins. Looking at our present context and crisis, as you'll note on the bottom of the page of the handout and then the next page. The present context and crisis confronting the Black church in the United States is attributable to several factors, which include the historic and enduring pluralism in the United States. The United States, from its very beginning, has always been made up of many groups of people, though not all have always had full citizenship, but the nation has always been made up of different peoples. Increasing recognition of diversity as a value. More and more, diversity is being recognized and justified as a good for the United States. The legitimacy of institutions, organizations, businesses, and even churches is thought to be proven by whatever they can cite as evidence of their diversity. The Obama presidency's signaling of a shift from liberal democracy, that is that traditional understanding of democracy that was forged in European and American resistance movements, to the powerful monarchs, shifting to this type of pluralistic democracy in response to the increasing diversity and efforts to secure places for minorities and to protect generally all citizens from the tyranny of powerful factions. Now, the 2012 presidential election, as Mitt Romney correctly said, was a referendum on the future of America. It was an opportunity for the American people to choose which kind of nation they want to be and which type of government they want to have. And the outcome of the election was clearly a choice for this pluralistic democracy, embracing the diversity of the nation and not privileging and giving favoritism to those who are the wealthy and fortunate few. Another factor is blacks having increased legislative representation but less legislative influence relative to other groups. The election of Barack Obama as President of the United States epitomizes the dilemma of blacks in America. The election of an African American to the highest political office in the United States has not translated into an elevation of the concerns in black communities to a national priority. Blacks are still a minority in the United States, and at the present moment may be facing the dreaded predicament of a persistent minority that can never win or carry the day in those matters that concern and interest them the most. Now, blacks are not facing this dilemma or predicament alone. There is uneven political participation and engagement of minority groups generally in American society. The best description of the United States is that it is plural but not equal. Another factor is the complication of Black solidarity by differences unacknowledged or unaffirmed among Black peoples in the United States. Black solidarity has long been regarded as a necessity for Black people's survival and their liberation, their uplift. For example, Frederick Douglass, in his newspaper, The North Star, wrote, "We are one, our cause is one, and we must help each other if we should succeed." Seldom, however, has this idea of Black solidarity allowed room for Blacks to express their differences or to celebrate their diversity. W.E.B. Du Bois argued, and many Black leaders have since followed his line of argument, that individuals are representative of the groups to which each belongs and therefore should subordinate their personal interests to the larger goals of the group. Another factor are the diverse views and non-collaborative political strategies of Christians, including Black Christians, participating in democratic society. Since World War II, several conceptions of Christian-inspired participation in American public life have emerged. These Christian blocs vie for audience, allegiance, and power in discussions about government, public policy, morality, and culture. In my research, I have identified 4 perspectives influencing Christian thought and participation in American democracy. The contrast between these perspectives are illustrated by the different kinds of social engagement found, for example, in President Barack Obama, who can be associated with Christian idealism. Congressman John Lewis, who can be associated with Christian idealism. Bishop Harry Jackson, who can be associated with Christian Reconstructionism. And Bishop T.D. Jakes, who can be associated with Christian communitarianism. At some point later, we'll be able to go more into detail about each of those. Now, if this, as I have described it, is indeed our context and our crisis, then what is the Black church response in view of theology's articulation of the given of Christianity? I suggest that vibrant Christian faith finds expression in public life through its focus, 1, on the renewal of Christianity in terms of social mission and ecumenism. 2, the contributions of Christian churches to the moral formation of its members and the preservation of civility that is required for democratic society. And 3, churches modeling beloved community. Christianity may be renewed through recovery of social mission and ecumenism. And as you'll note on the outline before you, Black Christian faith in the United States has long been characterized by the quest for true Christianity in contrast to the uses of Christianity for the justification of racism and other forms of injustice. Beyond the idea of renewal of the prophetic social witness of Christianity, Black Christian faith must attend to ecumenism, the unity of the church that has been endangered by the church's mirroring the many divisions in American society along the lines of race, gender, sexual orientation, and class. This new ecumenism is driven by re-imaging the church as a symbol of beloved community, emphasizing the basic ideas of Christianity, and recognizing Christ's presence in those acts that display beloved community. Based on a recent study conducted by who I think is one of the best King scholars, Lewis Baldwin, Martin Luther King Jr. would likely envision the renewal of Christianity through 4 directives. And those directives would be, first, to interpret, apply, and practice the beliefs the Christian church affirms in its worship. To interpret, apply, and practice the beliefs the Christian church affirms in its worship. Secondly, to rethink and reshape the church's relationship to the state, body politic, and civil religion. To rethink and reshape the church's relationship to the state, body politic, and civil religion. The third directive would be to develop better and more practical ways to use the church's resources for the common good. To develop better and more practical ways to use the church's resources for the common good. And fourthly, to return to a biblical conception of prophetic social witness. To return to a biblical conception of prophetic social witness. Josiah Royce said that the vitality and future of Christianity depends on a simplifying Christology and soteriology, that is, simplifying its belief about the person and the work of Christ. According to Royce, this simplification is achieved in the identification of three basic ideas. One of those basic ideas is community. Another basic idea is the moral burden of the individual. And another basic idea is atonement. This idea of community refers to this notion of people belonging to a group. And not only just merely belonging to the group, but depending on that group for their lives. The idea of the moral burden of the individual refers to the notion that there is something from which a person alone cannot escape. And the idea of atonement refers to the ultimate resolution of this moral burden. So where the moral burden presents us with a tremendous challenge or problem, atonement stands as whatever would remedy that burden or that predicament that we face. These essential ideas are the given of Christianity, according to Royce. Moreover, these three Christian ideas are aimed at addressing the needs of all human beings in any period of human history. These ideas are essential for understanding life. Royce goes on to say the Christian ideas, when stated in human terms, relate to the salvation of humankind. That is to say, they include the assertion that human life ought to be guided in the light of the highest good. For the Christian doctrine of life, these ideas insist that the human individual, as he is naturally constituted, simply cannot live a successful life unless he is transformed. These ideas do not need the theology or the doctrine, the dogma of any particular historical or institutional form of religion. Instead of religion, these ideas are really based, according to Royce, on metaphysics, an understanding of the world in which we exist. Focus on these ideas not only keeps the church centered on its mission, but also widens the church to the larger project of enabling human life in all of its diversity to flourish in the world. Moral formation involves reassessment of the concept of sin, organization and practices that respect and enable personal freedom, forums designed to discuss in responsible ways which acts result in the type of cooperation among free persons that will lead to beloved community. As Royce interprets Jesus' teachings, sin is any deed, any action that does not spring from love of God and humankind. Sin could also mean, based as, according to Royce, as he interprets Jesus' teaching, sin could be any deed, any act that conflicts with or violates wholehearted devotion to the kingdom of God or beloved community. Now, there are a whole lot of things that we call sin that don't quite fit into this category. For Martin Luther King, sin is both personal and social and rooted in ignorance, fear, and hatred, which together or singularly leads persons to turn inward rather than outward in cooperation. So sin is something rooted in selfishness. For Christians, the unselfishness of Jesus and his loyalty to community is a model and standard for moral and ethical behavior. Through Jesus' life, his ministry, and especially through his death, we see the length to which he goes in order to save others, to bring others into community. Royce claimed that the principle of all principles, the highest form of morality, is to work for beloved community if at any place it is not present or evident. The strong and fully formed individual, in the fullest sense of being moral and ethical, loves the world of which he or she is a part. As Royce argues, the individual seeks out other persons for cooperation. Now, though cooperation is fundamental for community, there are no particular actions, no particular acts that are required. Our task in moral formation is to discuss in responsible ways what we think and what we determine will really give us the type of cooperation that leads to beloved community. So morality, to a considerable degree, is open-ended. That didn't get your attention. Morality is open-ended. Morality involves cognitive, conceptual, and social processes for the discernment of appropriate expressions and desirable outcomes of human behavior. Morality, when it's properly understood, is a process of human communication, human dialogue, working together to come to an understanding of what constitutes a good life for us all. The formation of moral principles is social and deeply political, requiring learning, debate, and negotiation. Personal freedom is a precondition for moral agency. People cannot be moral unless they have freedom. While human beings are forced, whether by argument or by what is natural, what is said to be natural, or forced by the threat of punishment, to conform to a set of norms, they do not become truly moral agents. They become compliant, but not moral. Without discussion, debate, and negotiations, persons run the risk of acting without sufficient understanding, explanation, or justification. The idea of moral agency presupposes that persons can deliberate and choose responsibly between alternatives. The appeal to church leadership or resorting to legalism in order to establish certain moral convictions as factual or necessary constitutes a form of authority that may legitimate a given set of moral norms, but at the expense of suspending thought and abandoning dialogue. Jesus' proclamation of the kingdom of God, what we're calling beloved community, was interpreted by his followers as something to be realized in and through the church, beloved community, whether in the church or appearing elsewhere in society, is exemplified in the following ways, whereby a group of people shows itself simultaneously as a community of memory, people having an awareness of history, a community of hope, people living for and anticipation of a promising future, a community of interpretation, people seeking the truth. Royce stipulates 3 conditions for establishing community of any kind: memory, hope, and interpretation. And to these 3, I've added a few others. But looking at these first 3, according to Royce, the individual extends his or her life by the use of the group's collective memory and imagined future. We become larger than ourselves. when we connect with others by a shared memory and a shared vision of a future. According to Royce, the interpretation of the kind that leads to beloved community is triadic mediation. Now sounds like a real complicated thing, but basically what he means is that when people are interpreting, they're in the process of trying to unite. Rather than always looking at two things being opposite, it's always necessary to bring a third alternative to bring people to a point of resolution, bringing them closer as well to truth. So what we know as a truth is not always trying to reconcile two opposites, but bringing a third in order to give us an alternative way of looking at things. People become beloved community as a community of worship. People encountering the divine and affirming sublime human values. Now you might ask, why emphasize worship? Isn't it redundant to emphasize worship? Isn't this something that churches already do? Yes, churches are worshiping communities, but here the emphasis is on the quality of worship. In 1903, in The Souls of Black Folk, W.E.B. Du Bois identified the frenzy or shout provoked by music and preaching as typical of black worship. That is, in the black Protestant evangelical churches. The challenge of today is reframing emotional expression within a theology of encounter with God, an encounter involving the experience of being touched by God in all aspects of one's personhood, in the intellect, in the emotion, and in the body. We become beloved community as a community of healing, people being transformed and made whole. As communities of healing, churches enable persons to achieve wholeness in various ways. We become beloved community as a community of presence, people engaging in regular face-to-face encounters governed by trust and cooperation, love and sacrifice. Genuine community involves experience and connection, real, tangible connection and participation in a common life and sacrifices for that common life. We become beloved community as a community of inclusion, people embracing completely their diversity. Any social group has within it some measure of difference. Some are taller than others, some are shorter than others, some are older than others, some are younger than others. We differ in complexion, we differ in life stories. There's always some way that people are different. Inclusion, therefore, brings within African American congregations, inclusion, therefore, begins, I would say, with African American congregations and denominations by embracing the diversity already within them. And the lessons that are learned and the successes gained at this level prepare churches to embrace all of humankind in global community. To become inclusive begins just where people are. Steps towards inclusion require review and revision of the patterns of social organization, and also review and maybe implementation of democratic practices. I'll close here just on looking at this idea of beloved community. Is it something that's real? Is it just a figment of the imagination? Can anything as wonderful as beloved community be achieved? Can American democracy, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all persons are equal, long endure to lift us to beloved community? For life exists in the universe, it flourishes only where there is order. That is, when systems emerge and are able to maintain some degree of internal unity and stability. Life does not exist in chaos. God's creation of the universe begins with the introduction of order, upon the darkness of chaos. Across the formless void and murky waters, God breathed and spoke, saying, "Let there be light." And life emerged from the illuminate cosmic blueprint of divine order. No thing, human or otherwise, can exist in isolation from anything else. Selfishness is death. Survival and flourishing requires cooperation. Each living thing depends on something else for its existence. In human life, order and cooperation find their ultimate expression in what we call community and love. There is no life in the fullest sense apart from beloved community. It is real. Royce says, community is reality. The writer of Hebrews calls the role of the great heroes and heroines of faith and says, they look for a city whose builder and maker is God. They died in faith without having ever reached this city. At any time, they could have abandoned the search and gone back to their old way of living. Still, they could not surrender this idea of life in the city of God. Not only in the Bible, but also in the repository of the spirituals. Men and women sang, "I'm a poor pilgrim of sorrow. Sometimes I'm tossed and driven. I don't know where to roam. But I heard of a city called heaven. I decided to make heaven my home." Though spoken at different times in history and called by different names, city of God, heaven, the kingdom of God, the aspiration is the same. Life in a community, a beloved community, something far better than what we have now. If in our striving we fall short, we are made better through the struggle, and the light of community continues to shine over against the chaos and death that would otherwise imperil human civilization. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ware, for that very scholarly presentation about the beloved community and how the church can get involved. It's a pleasure to be here with Dr. Byron, Dr. Harrison, and the panelists, Kamilah, Bywaters, and Reverend Slayton. It's also a pleasure to be back here at Howard University. I have a close family connection with Howard. My father is an undergraduate graduate of Howard. My brother and brother-in-law were dental students at graduated from Howard Dental School. My cousin Cheryl was a pharmacist, graduated from the pharmacy school. Cheryl, stand up. She's here with you. And my niece, who's in the hospital, Marcia, is obviously a divinity student today. It's certainly appropriate that you have a member of Congress responding to the divinity school presentation. Because I'm sure Dr. Ware remembers the story of the congressman and the minister, the two ministers who showed up at the pearly gates at the same time. St. Peter's escorted them to their quarters. The congressman, palatial accommodations, wall-to-wall carpet, great picture window, new furniture, just absolutely palatial accommodations. And the two ministers, Dr. Ware will tell you, were escorted to a room, old furniture, no rug on the floor. And just as St. Peter turned to go away, one of the ministers said, "Excuse me, St. Peter, I think you've made a mistake. This cannot be the reward that we get, ministers of the gospel who have praised the Lord through our entire career, and the congressman of all people gets accommodations like that." And Dr. Ware will tell you what St. Peter said. So he said, "Well, Reverend, you don't understand. We got ministers up here all the time. That's the first congressman we've had in 50 years. So it is a pleasure to discuss to respond. And I, frankly, want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about the democracy and the beloved community. We're at a time when the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King's beloved community is well exemplified by this program. We know that he just didn't see the beloved community as a place of leisure and relaxation, but one where people could get together and work together and work and be bound by brotherhood. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice would be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. Good health care and quality education would replace disease and ignorance. Love and trust would triumph over hatred and fear. Injustice and peace would replace conflict and war. By working together, we could rid the community of joblessness, poverty, hunger, homelessness, hopelessness, and other detrimental human conditions. By working together, and this is exactly what Howard Divinity School is working by these conversations. Now, there are a lot of opportunities in Congress today to use the beloved community as our model. I guess the first and most important thing we do in showing our priorities is obviously the budget and how we deal with the least of these within the budget priorities. We're not doing so hot, I can tell you that. Just in January, we passed $4 trillion worth of tax cuts without canceling the $1 trillion automatic across-the-board cuts in spending. And so we if you just look at kind of what we're doing, it looks like the tax cuts have a higher priority over about anything else that we do. The fact that we did not cancel the across-the-board cuts, that cut everything, it just was shocking to me. And now we're trying to figure out how we're going to pay for the tax cuts that we passed. It reminds me of a story that our former governor tells about the chair of the Senate Finance Committee when I was in the state Senate. Ed Willie was a conservative. Everybody hated him because you couldn't get anything out of him. He was just so conservative, stingy. Word was you couldn't get a dime out of him with a crowbar, and everybody hated him. He showed up in a bar shortly before an election and heard the people mumbling about it. Oh, Ed Willie, nobody in here gonna vote for Ed Willie. Can't get a dime out of him with a crowbar. He heard all the people mumbling about him. He turned to the bartender, raised his glass of beer and said, "Bartender, when Ed Willie drinks, everybody drinks." He couldn't believe it. It set up the whole house. Everybody started celebrating. Ed Willie, Ed Willie. Oh, why are you talking bad about Ed Willie? He's all right with me. He got every vote in here. Set up the house like that. Oh, they were just celebrating. After a few minutes, he took a couple of dollars out of his pocket, put it on the bar, and said, "Bartender." Everybody looked up. "Bartender, when Ed Willie pays, everybody pays." Celebrate the fact that everybody got a tax cut. In a couple of days, we're going to tell you how we're going to pay for it. We may end up cutting Social Security and Medicare. We'll certainly end up cutting food stamps and aid to poor. And you haven't heard anybody talking about a jobs bill since we started talking about tax cuts. I don't have any idea how we're going to end up paying for it, but we're just celebrating now because we got you a tax cut. In a few days, we're going to be paying for it, and unfortunately, the beloved community will not be the model of how that happens. We can use the beloved community in terms of immigration. We have people who are here, many of them here since their childhood, don't know any other country. What are we going to do? We should think in terms of brotherhood and sisterhood, working together and see how we can get a path to citizenship that makes some sense. Certainly the school children, you want to make sure they have access to education so they can be the best they can be. But that would be a nice, the beloved community would be a nice strategy and model to use. But I want to spend most of my time talking about crime policy. Because in crime policy, you really need a beloved community model. Unfortunately, most of the time in crime policy, we use slogans and sound bites as our model. So whoever can come up with the best slogan and sound bite wins the day. You talk about 3 strikes and you're out, abolish parole, mandatory minimum sentences. What I like is no cable TV in the prisons.
Amen.
You can just imagine the cable guy showing up, disconnecting the cable, and everybody all over town said, "Oh, now we're safe. We've reduced crime," because they reduced it. know that a lot of these slogans not only make no sense, but are actually counterproductive. Mandatory minimums end up with some of the most simple-minded results. Just one of them, Marcia Alexander in Florida, abusive husband was approaching her. She shot the firearm up in the air to ward him off. Turns out discharging a firearm has a mandatory minimum in Florida, 20 years. She was guilty of discharging the firearm, and the judge had no choice because of the mandatory minimum sentence to impose a 20-year sentence. Now, if she had just leveled a weapon and shot the man, non-aggravated manslaughter, and killed him, maximum 15 years. That's the simple-minded stuff. So when you hear all these girlfriends in jail because their boyfriends were dealing drugs, they may have driven them to a drug deal, may have taken a message. Okay, so they're guilty and they're part of the conspiracy. When they get sentenced, you look up on the matrix, and the mandatory minimum sentences are based on the weight of the conspiracy. All the drugs the boyfriend was dealing, that's what the girlfriend has to serve time on, and that's why some of these girlfriends end up serving 5, 10, 20 years in prison. They don't get a reduction because they don't have any information to rat on somebody. The boyfriend who's dealing has all the information, so he turns in some of his friends. He gets a lesser sentence. The girlfriend serving more time than he is, didn't know anything about anything. Wasn't using drugs, wasn't dealing drugs, just because of the association and you trip over a couple of things. That's what mandatory minimums get you. Try more juveniles as adults. That has been studied. Every study shows that will increase the crime rate. Because if you have a young person who's in court, in juvenile court, the judge can order psychological services, education, even family services. If they go to adult court, the judge has to either let them walk out of court or lock them up with drug dealers, robbers, and rapists. And after a couple of years, guess who is more likely to be back in trouble? You have increased the crime rate by codifying that slogan. We have codified so many slogans and sound bites that this first chart that we passed out is a result. Those green bars are the incarceration rate per 100,000 in most of the countries that you can name off the top of your head, 50 to 200,000, 50 to 200 per 100,000 in jail today. That little purple, that little reddish bar is the United States, #1 in the world, 700 and some per 100,000. That is particularly egregious when you notice that the Pew Research Center has calculated that anything over 500 per 100,000 is actually counterproductive. You've messed up so many families, you've wasted so much money, holding people a lot longer than any rational purpose. To run up an incarceration rate over 500 is actually counterproductive. You are adding to crime. You've got so many people with criminal records in the community that nobody wants to bring a business into the community. Fewer jobs, more crime, counterproductive over 500. Our average incarceration rate, 700 and some per 100,000. Average in the African American community, 2,200. 10 states lock up blacks at the rate of almost 4,000 per 100,000. 50 to 200 in most of the world, over 500 counterproductive. You got 10 states locking up blacks at the rate of 10,000. Because we've codified all those little slogans and sound bites, that's where we end up. Second chart shows we don't wait until they're grown up. We lock up juveniles off the chart compared to other countries. And we know there's a close association with education. The #3 chart, the first half of it shows what was happening in 1970. Green is a high school graduate, red is a high school dropout. You could drop out of school and go get a job, no problem. Now, because we're in an information-based high-tech economy, if you don't have at least a high school education, you're not going to be able to find a job. This chart on the bottom shows that you've got about 30% of the people, African-American males, high school dropouts. About 30% are working today, about a third out in the street, and about a third more than working in jail today. That's not probation, parole, and all that other stuff. That's behind bars today. That's the trajectory you're on when you're dropping out of school. We know that we can do better than that. We know that this is what the Children's Defense Fund calls the Cradle to Prison Pipeline. We know that all you're doing here is just wasting the taxpayers' money, adding to crime, and it's particularly bad because we know how to reduce crime. All you have to do is invest in children early, get them on the right track and keep them on the right track, get them to college or on the job, and they don't get in trouble. You want to change what the Children's Defense Fund calls the Cradle to Prison Pipeline and create a Cradle to College and Career Pipeline. And we know how to do that. You start with teen pregnancy prevention, so fewer babies are born into dysfunctional families. Prenatal care can reduce learning disabilities and mental retardation. Nurse visits can help parents deal with child abuse and significantly reduce child abuse, which is highly correlated with future crime. Early childhood education, make sure they can read by the 3rd grade. Teachers tell us that up to the 3rd grade you learn to read. After the 3rd grade you read to learn. If you can't read by the 3rd grade, you're not learning after the 3rd grade. And refer back to that chart of what happens when you're on the way to dropping out. After school programs, mentorship programs, boys and girls clubs, make sure they have constructive things to do with their time and have access to college. We know if we do that, we'll get them on the right track and keep them on the right track and make sure that they have good opportunities. You will not only reduce crime, but you'll save more money than you cost, than you spend. Now, taking this information in consideration, I've introduced the Youth Promise Act, which was mentioned. It is as much of a process as a program, but it's a funding program for localities that have come together, formed a council, get everybody around the table that has anything to do with children getting in trouble. So obviously law enforcement, but also the school system, the boys and girls clubs, court services like probation, parole, foster care, mental health, business community, anybody that's got anything to do with children getting in trouble, get them around the table and study what is going on in the community. First of all, how much money are you spending on counterproductive incarceration? How much money are you spending on teen pregnancy? Because if you have a good prevention program, you can reduce crime, you're also going to reduce teen pregnancy. How much are you spending on Medicaid and social services resulting from teen pregnancies? Put all that together. Come up with an evidence-based strategy. Evidence-based, we put that in the bill. What, as opposed to what? As opposed to all the slogans and sound bites that you'd be funding, you didn't put evidence-based in there. And make sure you come up with a plan, cost it out, and the government will fund the program to get it started. As you save money, talk to people around the table, because you're going to save a lot of money. Make sure that they will contribute some of their savings to keep the programs going. So if we funded the program, we don't want you coming back for more. You're offering your own because you're going to use your savings to keep the programs going. Now we know these programs work. In Boston, they came together with a comprehensive program. They had about 13 juvenile murders a year, about 1 a month. They went 3 years without a single juvenile murder. In Richmond, Virginia, they had 19 murders in an area. They had a comprehensive approach, got everybody together, went from 19 down to 2. If you figure there are about 4 gunshot wounds for every one that, 4 gunshot wounds where people don't die, for every gunshot wound where somebody does die, you can just think of all of the medical services that were not provided at the Medical College of Virginia, uncompensated care or government expense. You'd probably save the $2.5 million cost of the program just in hospital costs before you start counting all the people that aren't sitting up in jail, and all the police and everybody else didn't have to go chasing after them, and all the teenagers that weren't getting pregnant. You saved a lot more than you spent. In fact, Pennsylvania funded about 100 programs, $60 million they spent. They went back a couple of years later, and they spent $60 million. They calculated they saved about $300 million. So if you can get 5 to 1, and if you can get people to chip back in some of their savings, you can get these programs funded. Now, people ask, can you afford all that money? And the back chart, number 5, is putting money on the table, shows that the average black incarceration rate 2,200 per 100,000. If you only locked up 500 per 100,000, there would be about 1,750 fewer people in jail in a community of 100,000, and that would be about $50 million that little community would be saving. Look at the number of children divided out, and that's about $1,600 per child every year. And if you targeted that money on children at risk, 1/3 of the children, that's $5,000 per at-risk child per year that on average you're wasting on counterproductive incarceration. For 10 states, that bottom line is almost $10,000 per at-risk child every year that they have wasting codifying simple-minded slogans and sound bites. So when they say we can't afford it, we are wasting it today in counterproductive incarceration. Now, some of these programs, the church and the beloved community will obviously be involved because the faith-based community will be sitting around the table helping to develop what the strategy should be. And so that would be the beloved community model. Now, one of the things that is, as we look now, we actually have a chance of passing it. I've introduced it several times. Like I said, we make a choice. You can have the simple-minded slogans, or you can have the Youth Promise Act approach. The House of Representatives is very supportive of the Youth Promise Act. The U.S. Senate, bless their hearts, still want to just spend all the money, locking them up, throw away the key. The anti-gang bill in the Senate, for example, has a provision in it that if you're designated a gang member and commit a violent crime that is not serious, violent crime, not serious. What's that? What, a school fight, in the schoolyard, get in a fight? Okay. Violent crime, not serious, you can get up to 20 years. You talk about the GENA 6, well, how'd they get 20 years? Well, how many people think a bill with a provision like that could pass the U.S. Senate? Anybody think? Well, it did pass. Anybody remember what the vote was? No, because they didn't take a vote. It passed by unanimous consent. Came to the House and was assigned to the Crime Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee when I was chairman. That's why you never heard about it before, because I killed it right then and there. Decided we weren't going to have a hearing. It was dead as soon as it got to my subcommittee. We are now trying to work with the Senate to talk them into something that makes a little more sense. And the Youth Promise Act would be, and we have a little more optimism because of the response to Newtown. We have the obvious school shooting, and people, I think, were shocked. The little elementary school children had their bodies riddled with bullets, and there has been a different reaction. There wasn't any reaction to Virginia Tech. There wasn't any reaction to Columbine. When Gabby Giffords, Congressman in Arizona, got shot, they did a poll and found that support, after that incident, support for gun control actually went down after that. Because of Newtown, I think it shocked people, and now we're talking, the task force in the House has recommended a lot of different initiatives. An assault weapons ban like we passed in 1993, it expired, reinstating the assault weapons ban. Why anybody needs a military assault weapon walking up and down the street is beyond me. You don't need one. We need to ban them so that you can't go out and shoot all the people. The only purpose of those things is to kill a lot of people quickly. You don't need those at all. We also need to limit the number of bullets you can put in a magazine. In Aurora, there were about 100 bullets, and he was shooting up everybody. If you limit it to 10, you have to stop, reload, give people an opportunity to capture you while you're reloading. That's what happened with Gabby Giffords. They were reloading, and that's what happened there. We limit the size of the magazines. The other is background checks. Eliminate all the loopholes, not just the gun show loophole, but all the loopholes to make sure that only the right people can get guns. But if you're going to reduce, if you want to have school safety, you can't limit it just to gun safety. You have to have safety generally. And as one of our experts has told us, if your school shooting prevention program begins when the shooter is at the door, it's too late.
Right.
You have to have mental health services that capture these, that get these people steered in the right direction before they get in trouble. You have to have all of the prevention and early intervention services. That's how you actually reduce crime. So we're focusing as much on mental health and general prevention, because if you made the school a fortress of safety, you still haven't done anything, because our children just get shot in the movies or the mall or somewhere else. We have to have general safety in our communities, and that's what the Youth Promise Act is designed to do. But that entire model is with the community coming together, and that's where the beloved community is certainly the model that we want to focus on. So I want to thank the Howard University Divinity School for focusing and suggesting that we ought to use the beloved community as a model for legislation, and hopefully people will get that message and do exactly that. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to say thank you to Dr. Harrison for considering me to fulfill the shoes of Sia. If anyone knows Sia, she is passionate about community and justice, and her work ethic is really out of this world. So I feel honored to be able to stand here in this place. I also want to thank the faculty for creating this space for students to prepare and grow in our theological reflection as we examine our faith in the context of the world in which we serve. Women as precautions for constructive theology and public discourse on democracy. As we enter the task of theology toward participating in public discourse on democracy, it is important to first be constructive, 2, to pay attention to our definitions, and 3, to be inclusive in our approach. Let us be constructive. I have come to respect theology as the discipline it is. It is funny how some define theology as God talk, but it is so much more. Just because someone thinks and talks about food doesn't make them a nutritionist, as it is that just because we talk about God doesn't make one a theologian. There is a seriousness which with these conversations should be pursued with intentional methods, processes, sources, and exposure to various perspectives, and the steps that are employed in constructive theology. I appreciate this about Dr. Ware and his thorough approach. Most important, in my view, for theological conversations about democracy is the combination of critique and construction. Critique is important in evaluating, however, if one spends all of their time negating others, they have not moved any closer to a solution or outcome. Critique is a step in the process, not the totality of the process. We must deconstruct concepts that no longer serve the community in healthy ways, and we must reconstruct new interpretations that will help us as a guide on engaging in public discourse and interpret a context which is best from which to act. Secondly, we need to pay attention to our definitions. Because communication is so key in having conversations about potentially controversial issues, we must openly and honestly define our terms and understand that our word choice has implications in our arguments. For example, in February of 2010, Dr. Eddie Glaude wrote a blog entitled, "The Black Church is Dead." While I recognize and appreciate the main points of the article and the conversations that have ensued after it's being published, the article is an example of how we need to define our terms. First, we must be clear on how we are defining the Black church, as we describe what it is and is not doing. Are we using Leakin and Mamaya's definition? Are we including Black pastors and priests of mainline denominations? Who is included in this indictment? To state that something is dead implies that it was once alive, and the condition has changed. What are the conditions under which GLAAD would consider the Black church alive? Ronald Neal and others have offered that empirical evidence must be used to substantiate claims like GLAAD's. I agree and also question our definition of legacy as it pertains to living up to what we think the Black church has been. In defining legacy, there is often a nostalgic view of the civil rights era, but as Dr. Ware has taught, we must differentiate between collective memory and historical perspective. If we measure the life of the current Black church based on the collective memory of the Black church of the civil rights era, then yes, we would be as adamant about its death as Dr. GLAAD. However, each person that marched on Washington was not necessarily part of a politically active church that was with Martin Luther King at every protest, or believed in everything he believed without question. A more fitting method would be the phenomenological method of researching our legacy, visualizing what really was versus imposing upon the legacy those things we think ought to have happened. The Black church is not dead. It is very much alive and diverse. Our collective memory does not always account for disagreement within camps or for the small number of churches that Dr. King could count on for protest. In addition, our legacy goes back further than civil rights, and we can see strong ties of activism in the Reconstruction era and revolts of enslaved. Even in those periods, there was not one single way of resistance or engagement. A critique on the vital signs of the Black church must be based in reality, and then the reconstruction can include the points where we might offer constructive alternatives for engagement. The precaution is this: are we calling ourselves back to a legacy that never was? Or is the Black church following suit on how we have always been? Diverse in our belief, purpose, and approach? Are we claiming the Black church to be dead because it no longer mirrors what we believe it ought to be? The Black church is not dead. The church is not dead. It's more than just one issue or one idea. The weakness is the failure to communicate our diversity of ideas into our message. For example, the religious right is vocal about its views on issues based in biblical interpretation. But what does the religious left have to say with regard to the Beatitudes as grounding for social action? The religious moderate. What are other religious messages that would be helpful in public discourse? Thirdly, we must be inclusive in our approach. This brings me to my final point. Because of our diversity in the very much alive Black church, it would behoove us to be inclusive in our theology as we discuss engaging in public discourse and social action. Using terms like conservative and liberal, are we dividing ourselves unnecessarily and becoming distracted with labels versus focusing on a shared gospel? Do we use the terminology to devalue others? Is there a way to value all that is offered that betters us even if it doesn't look like our program? In theological discourse and construction, do we use labels for categorization and classification for the purpose of defining or as judgment in an attempt at othering and to bolster self? Must one be negated in order to promote another? A precaution in our theological discourse is to see the connection between othering and exclusion in our theologies, with the splintered and disconcerted efforts in praxis. Have we been proliferating a non-existent dualism within religious social activism? If two churches have different emphasis on the purpose of the church, does that automatically preclude them from working together on a specific issue? For example, if both churches find common ground in the need for character-building mentorship programs, can they not work together? If churches disagree on the issue of abortion, but agree that our children need safe spaces to spend after school, can they not come together as coalition partners for bettering their neighborhood? If we seek to only collaborate with those who think and believe what we think and believe, we will never have enough force to make lasting and systemic changes. We will be splintered in our approach and mediocre at best. If our theological justifications for social action are to be most helpful, then we must be deliberate. We must be intentional and thoughtful toward inclusivity. Inclusivity of various perspectives helps us to build upon each other's resources. As we come together in interdenominational coalitions, we must know how the system works in implementing change before entering public discourse in a serious manner. We need to educate ourselves as to what is within the realm of government and where we cross the line into expecting government to do our job as religious leaders. It takes changes in laws and the transformation of people in order to effect lasting change. We have the option of doing a twofold approach of political advocacy and being the beacon of morality in our neighborhoods, like participating in programs on education and relationship building in order to foster health and whole communities. We can also choose to see where the government offers comprehensive and evidence-based legislation, which not only helps our communities, but offers funding to responsible and effective programming in neighborhoods like Congressman Scott's Youth Promise Act. Not in a dualistic and splintering way, but in a cooperative and concerted effort toward a common goal. To that end, the Howard University School of Divinity Student Government Association, administration, the faculty, and staff, together in our cooperative and concerted effort toward a common goal, we, the members of our community, are with you, Congressman Scott, on comprehensive gun control and youth violence reduction legislation. We have here a petition because we believe that our neighborhoods, cities, counties, states, and nations should be places of peace where everyone can live peacefully. We must all protect our children and ensure that their safety and security, as well as nurturing healthy and positive attitudes, is part of our responsibility. We believe that all children should have equal access to quality education. Education is the pathway for our children to grow and to be productive citizens in our community. We acknowledge the Second Amendment. We believe that guns should be regulated to prevent warlike weapons, and we support the gun show loophole and advocate for restricting higher capacity gun magazines. We urge Congress to support legislation like the Youth Promise Act in order to help fund nonprofit organizations that are on the front lines in providing for our children. Government cannot do it alone, and we pledge our time and talent to uplifting our communities and promoting the healthy development of our children. With more funding, our programs can become a deeper impact on our neighborhoods, and we also have signed our petition in support of the work that you're doing. Thank you, and that concludes this one.
Good evening. I would be last, right? So promise me you will stay. I will promise you one thing. I will not be long. I was writing down those folks that I wanted to acknowledge. Again, I have not been long gone from Howard. It is my sincere, I mean it's from bottom of my heart, honor to have been asked here to speak on this evening. Dr. Jeremiah Wright spoke on the main campus a couple weeks ago. So we spoke for dinner afterwards. And I said, man, if I ever got the honor to speak at Howard, man, that would just blow me away. Well, keep it right well. And when Ms. McDaniel called that Friday, I said, wow, God really does answer prayer. So I'm honored to Dean Pollard, Dr. Byron, Dr. Harrison, Dr. Rice. What an honor to see you back there. Dr. Hobson, my frat brother. Dr. Newhart, Dr. Nwako, who I believe actually does love Jesus. Dr. Davis, I think I saw, and of course, Dr. Gilbert. Democracy and the beloved community. What an interesting topic for someone who is truly committed, sees himself truly committed to social justice. It's almost oxymoronic to think that you could love justice and work for a politician. You don't know how difficult that is when I say it, because it really, really is at the end of the day. There are a number of issues that my boss and I just necessarily don't see eye to eye on. But at the end of the day, I get these things in the mailbox called bills that I have to pay. And so I have to make some type of conscious decision on sort of where am I going to place my theology, my personal feelings and all that stuff, so that it makes sense for me to survive. But this topic, it sort of resonates with me quite a bit. I wanted to lift up initially the four subgroups that are presented by Eugene Robinson in his most recent book. Eugene Robinson, the writer for the Washington Post, probably seen him on MSNBC. There's this book called Disintegration. And in it he says that the Black America has been splintered into four subgroups. They are the transcendent elite, the mainstream middle, an emergent community, and an abandoned group of African Americans. What he's suggesting is that no longer is the African American community able to be just lumped in one group and be labeled with a thought pattern about this. Or that you can just assume that this is how black folk are on this issue, because they're different groups. I agree with him. I also agree that moving forward, we must first recognize that black folk have different interests and competing claims. And second, an immediate and large response to the desperate and deteriorating situation among that latter group, the abandoned blacks. Thus comes your theology, this whole Jesus stuff. I learned here at Howard. You know, Jesus had a political campaign. It probably was in Luke 4, was it Luke 4, Luke 14, one of those, where he goes to his folks. You know, if you really wanted to run a good campaign, you announce it in front of people you know. So they said he went home, right? He stood in front of the folks that he knew, and he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." That's 4:18. So in many ways, that's sort of like an endorsement. You know, before you step out on your political campaign, am I right, Congressman? People want to know who behind you. Who you get their money from? Jesus is in front of his home folks, and he says, I got some supporters behind me, but that was big one, the Lord, ordained me to do this. And this is going to be my political platform. I'm going to deal with poor people, incarcerated folks, and folks that tend to be lost, marginalized. And I think today, in order for this dance to happen properly between democracy and the beloved community, it's going to require this term we're dealing with, the black church, reassess its treatment of that fourth group that Eugene Robinson was, this abandoned group, poor. You know, Acts chapter 3. I sound like a biblical scholar. You remember Dr. Gilbert, I came and I said I wasn't going to preach. I was just coming here to take some class. But in Acts chapter 3, it's a story of two brothers heading to church for prayer. And they encounter this broken brother who's poor and ask him for some change. They say, we don't have anything like that. But what we give you, it can change your life. I don't know who I'm going to argue with on this at some other point about this, but I think it's open for discussion when we talk about democracy, the love community, and the black church's role. The black church seems to be overly consumed with building stuff. We're so busy getting to church that we don't see the people who are literally living in the shadows of these beautiful temples that we made. As a result, their lives are not changed and the communities aren't changed. I take a certain route from East Baltimore to come into City Hall every day. I take it on purpose. I come down Preston. And it looks like a war zone oftentimes. The only new development for about 6 blocks is Israel Baptist Church, beautiful, and Scruggs Funeral Home. It's in this environment today that we want to respond to this question, the role and the future of the black church. It's very difficult to approach this subject matter, though, without hearing the far-off distance and repeating utterances of others regarding what we have talked about tonight, the validity and the relevance of the black church. This comes, I believe, as a result of the historical success of the black church, particularly those successes during the civil rights movement. As a result, I'm going to argue this evening that there has been created an expectation of the black church. Will the black church have an answer? Will the black church have a solution? Will it at least have a response? It's this expectation that lingers in the hopes and hearts of those in society, I believe, that feel marginalized and misrepresented. What you have to do nowadays is listen to the news or the radio. Part of my job in this role is to sort of stay engaged in talk radio, particularly in the morning, see if anybody calling talking crazy about my boss. And as you listen to those voices, you can hear those who sincerely are passionate about the fact that they've been mistreated or have been done unjustly in society. At the backdrop of all of their questions, I don't care what the subject matter is or what the given day is. We could be talking about potholes in the street. We could be talking about 6 or 7 people getting shot on the weekend. We could be talking about somebody leaving his wife. Before the radio program goes off, somebody can ask this question. What's the church doing about it? This expectation. What is the church? The uncertain sound of the cries of these folks on the radio is becoming deafening, but it's also becoming familiar. And it's causing a great challenge for the church. Whose particular cry, if we're listening to Eugene Robinson's proposal, whose cry are we going to hear? Are we going to hear the transcendent? Those who write the nice checks to the church? We're going to listen to the emerging group, this new group. If you've been in any black church recently, you know there's a struggle between hymns and traditional music. Whose cry are we going to hear? Will we hear the cry of corporate America? Will we hear the cry of political power? Or will we hear the cry of the people? One of my favorite books while I was here at Howard was a book written by Professor Ober Hendricks, The Politics of Jesus. He has this chapter, what I really like. It says it's incumbent upon the church to treat the needs of the people as holy. Let that sit with you for a minute. When we think about how we do church today, who do we allow in the church? Some folks aren't right to come to certain churches. So if you aren't right to come to the church, then what qualifies you for the church to stand in the gap for you? I decided after November 6th, on the 7th, that I was going to write an article and submit it in response to this recurring question about the relevance and validity of the black church. And in it I state that that particular election raised some challenges for several different interest groups. You have to realize that as I'm writing this, I'm almost sure that it's got to go through my communications department to make sure it fits what it is that come out of my boss's mouth. Because in this role, I really don't have an opinion. I can say some things, but it needs to be better if it will work. So I wrote it a little bit odd because it just worked better that way. But again, I stated that the election raised challenges for several different interest groups regarding the role of faith communities that were primarily attended by people of color. But none during this election was more publicly courted by policy and political initiatives than the Black church. Evident was the continued recognition by those in the political community, in particular of the African American pulpit. But still there were others who were not all that impressed. So critical to November 6th election day results were the efforts and the voice of the Black church and the Black preacher in the state of Maryland. There is no denying that. In Maryland, the ballot dealt with issues of justice and empowerment. Not to mention that much of the electorate was divided clearly along racial lines. Few interests, though, fell to solicit the support of faith leaders from the Black community. Nobody left that community untouched. Specifically, Black clergy were courted for their support of ballot issues pertaining to same-sex marriage, expanded gambling, and educational opportunities for immigrants. Now, many of these interests determined early on in their campaigns that the support of the faith community was critical. But over the course of several months, and I was taking note, I only saw one television show, one television commercial ad that highlighted a faith leader who was not of color. Protestant denominations, many of whom were overwhelmingly Democratic in party affiliation, were out front and they were centered. As I stated earlier, at various points after the Civil Rights Movement, there have been those who would ask if in fact the Black church had any relevance in our society. More specifically, they wondered aloud if the power of the Black church died, in particular in this case with the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm reminded that it was during the 1970s that sociologist E. Franklin Frazier asked had the church died and agonized death in the harsh turmoil of the 1960s. But even more recently, as was stated, Eddie Glaude suggested that the Black church as we know it was dead. His comments sparked huge debate and it continues on. But these views are likely a result, I believe, of perceived increases in political and economic power of Black folk at large. Still from the 70s through present, a disproportionate majority number of Black folk continue to grapple with these issues related to racial discrimination in concentrated communities of poverty. For many of them, the church was the only place to find a word of encouragement or a sense of hope. Most critical to the limited stabilization was the Black preachers. Preachers throughout our country were committed to speaking truth to power and spreading the hope of God. That brings about, raises the question for me, which is one that was the churches, are the churches today modeling the beloved community? I hear the terminology often. I don't even think, if I heard it, I didn't recognize it before I came here. People use the term prophetic. Sort of use it in and out of conversations. But I think that there is such a fear of power that to a large degree, those who would be leaders in the faith community are not willing to take on a prophetic role. You can't agitate the leadership and still be a friend. I don't recall any photos, if anybody has one, I'll pay for it, of Dr. King standing with a candidate going, this person next year. His interest was always the same. Can the church model that today? I don't know. There's no doubt that the Black church remains a very dynamic and formidable force for change in American society. Much of the influence and power is the recognition of its function to remain under its own control, making it the ultimate social institution in African American history. There is today no greater or more powerful institution that exists today for any group of people than that of the Black church. Black church, though, wants to remain relevant. I'm going to take my seat. Looking at the November 12th activities around this presidential campaign, I want to suggest two major areas of significance that were raised, but I think we need to revisit them immediately and address it. First is the work of establishing a prominent voice in party politics. You're going to be a true voting bloc within a particular party, in this case, the Democratic Party. The church must demand the absolute resolve of retaining the language of God within its platform. The reason I say that is because the evangelical church has assured this language in the Republican platform. You may recall the silence one Tuesday evening while at the Democratic convention when there was a vote on the floor whether or not to amend the Democratic Party's platform to include the word God. Because I know how politics works, that means somebody took it out. Wasn't a vote for that party. Black church is going to participate in politics. They ought to have some demands. I think that ought to be first. Black church has a responsibility to remind the minority participants in that particular Democratic Party, all united by stories of their run-ins with oppression and discrimination, that they should never so easily turn their backs on God. You know, without God, there would be no Democratic Party. Without God, there would be no African, Hispanic, or Asian speakers at that particular convention. Without God, there certainly would not have been a black man awaiting the renomination of his party. The Black church cannot afford to get to the promised land and then forget the promise. The party doesn't want your God. How could it ever respect the man or woman of God? Secondly, the Black church must bring the devastating chaos of black violence to the forefront of the public square. No longer can we allow the debate of presidential politics or any other politics to totally ignore the enormous loss of life in poor urban communities all across this country. Anytime the number of deaths in one city outnumber the amount of deaths by those engaged in an actual war, silence cannot be a viable option. The prophetic voice that is assigned to clergy must then take the lead in bending the moral arc toward justice for all of us. On the heels of this type of electoral impact, the church must begin the hard work of establishing agendas that speak to the majority of faith principles and denominational similarities within the Black church. These agendas can and should be inclusive of those predominantly led African American civic organizations. Additionally, the church must develop the political savvy necessary to harness the power of political influence beneath the umbrella of democracy and justice. The Black church must demand that political machinery engage beyond the casual visits to worship service by office seekers to ensure that the Black church is never accused of being dead to the issues that impact people of color. The church must intentionally and methodically perform the following: engage in community organizing, manage personal influence, establish and solidify coalitions, employ and deploy lobby groups that work on behalf of the Black church in policy-making halls all across America. I'm going to take my seat with this final point. For those students here who are going to be theologians or whatever, we call ourselves when we leave here. There's a scripture about a blind man. I ain't gonna preach, I promise I won't. By the name of Bartimaeus, sitting on the side of the road, beneath the crowd, beneath the feet, beneath the rustle and tumble of everybody else. And the scripture reads something in Mark 10 that says, he heard that this guy by the name of Jesus is passing by. He begins to shout. Bob Gates said it makes me want to holler. So he shouts because he wants to be included. He wants access. And the folks who already have access tell him to shut up. Now that you have access, you got to let other folks in. Thank you.
The hour is calling. Let's give our panelists another round of applause. And just for the next few minutes, we're going to open the floor. I know the hour is late, but just for those that have some questions that are percolating in the soul and the mind, and you can't help yourself. Just a few questions. Does anyone have a question for the panel, or are there any questions that the panelists have for each other?
I'm not sure exactly what how Martin Luther King. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how Martin Luther King described it, but he said you can't legislate how people feel, but you can legislate what they do. In terms of, we know how to reduce violence. If you give young people opportunities from very early to get them into a cradle to college and career pipeline, the crime rate will plummet. There are studies and evidence, and it's absolutely clear you'll save a lot more money than you spend. If you just think of young people joining gangs, people make choices. And if you imagine a young person looking around and saying, I think I will join a gang. What was in second choice? What were other choices? If that's the best choice out there in a community, joining a gang, what kind of community do we have there for them? So we have to give them other opportunities, and when you give those other opportunities, the crime rate will plummet. You can't make people think right, but you can legislate in terms of criminal law. If they do certain things, they can get arrested and locked up. But we know what works and what doesn't work. There are a lot of prevention programs that don't work. They've been studied. They don't work. A lot of others do work. Most of them that do work save a lot more money in reduced prison and social service costs. They reduce the cost more than the programs cost to begin with. It's just a matter of the problem, the political problem is you don't get headlines when children do not get in trouble. You make headlines when you wait for them to drop out of school, join a gang, mess up, and then catch them, and then get into a bidding war and who can impose the most draconian sentence. And that's when you make the headlines, and unfortunately, help politicians get elected. We need to focus more on what works long term, get young people on the right track, keep them on the right track. We know how to do it. It's just the political will, and I think most of the public is already there. Politicians just kind of lagging behind.
Any other questions?
That's what the study showed. You have, most of the models involve constructive things to do with the young person's time, adult interaction, and heavy on education. Boys and Girls Clubs, Boy Scouts, Boys and Girl Scouts, mentorship programs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, but a comprehensive approach starting very early and not letting them up the air until either they get to college or get on the job. Once they have gotten to college, just enroll in college, or get on the job, the likelihood of them getting in trouble is a lot less. But with this, we've done a lot of studies, and we know what to do. If you stop and study what's going on in the community, hire somebody who has a background in this stuff, they can come up with an evidence-based plan. You're in a high crime area. Like I said, in Richmond, they had 19 murders, you went down to 2. In Boston, murder a month with 3 years without a single one. Everywhere you put one of these programs, you save a lot more money than you spend. We know what to do. It's just a matter of doing the work, coming together. First, the community has to make a decision that they're going to be serious about reducing crime, rather than coming up with who's got the best slogan, who's got the best soundbite, and who can make it the simplest. And baseball slogan or something like that. Name a crime, name a bill after somebody, called Mary's Law or something like that, so that you get to a situation where no responsible politician will vote against a crime bill named after somebody. However stupid it is, if it's named after somebody, there's a political problem in voting against it, whether it makes sense or not. We know what to do. And it's just a matter of getting serious, doing the research, finding out what's wrong with the community and what you need, and spending the money. You will save a lot more than you spend.
My second question is for Dr. Ware, and I do want to thank you all for engaging our community today. Dr. Ware, excuse me, you talked about the beloved community, and I think that in order for the beloved community to thrive in all the different communities you name, you need trust. And in this post 9/11 era, how do we model trust in our churches, in the community, with other churches? How do we get that trust when we live in a bureaucratic, non-trusting culture?
It's a very good question, and I'm probably not the best person to answer that. I'm not a behavioral scientist, but I can only just give an anecdote. The less people relate to each other or have real experiences with each other, they will become suspicious. When I first became knowledgeable, aware of that was in some trips overseas and working in ecumenical dialogues, where people people were coming together from different countries, speaking different languages and from different cultures. And the success of the dialogue initially depended on one thing, which was for people to honestly speak to each other and just to address the perceptions that they have of each other. But it requires people willing to expose themselves. There's a lot of vulnerability when that happens. But what's gained is greater than what we fear that we lose. But it's only when we are able to bring people in those type of situations where they have to share with each other, they have to work with each other. And in different contexts, different settings, it depends on what the resources are available to people wherever they are, whether it's in a church, whether it's in an organization, whether it's even here at the Divinity School. Creating these type of spaces for people to encounter each other and to learn and to grow from those encounters. But initially it begins with people exposing themselves, the vulnerability. It never feels comfortable. It does not feel comfortable when you actually encounter someone. When you truly encounter another human being as a subject, as you are truly a subject and as a person, there's no covering. And when people are willing to allow the cover to be removed, they can truly know each other. So we cannot force and make people trust each other, but if people are placed in certain situations, to just experience it, to present them with the opportunity. And once people have the opportunity, then in hindsight they will see that their fears were unwarranted. And so in the dialogues of the different countries I've gone to, all the people that participated, and some are very reluctant to participate, but after they had actually had the experience towards the end, after you spend 2 weeks with people and there's nowhere for you to go, you cannot avoid each other. You have to really encounter each other. So after 2 weeks, people spending time with each other, they don't want to leave after that because they have had a certain quality of experience that even they did not have before they came to participate. So I would think that utilizing whatever your resources are based upon the group that you're in to just give people the opportunity to make the space. And once people experience it, they get a taste of it, they never go back to suspicion and distrust anyone.
One final question. Okay. Last two.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you to the panel for your contribution. Dr. Ware, you talked about creating a metaphysical framework of morality. I hope I understood you correctly when you talked about that. Would you say that doing such would allow the African American church, the Black church, to do a better job in incorporating the spiritual but not religious generation?
Okay, the metaphysical framework for community. Well, both Roy and Slayton had a type of metaphysics that they used where both of them felt that ideas are not just concepts in the mind of people, but ideas have correspondence to the way that the world truly is and how this is. In one sense, that's very helpful when you develop a metaphysics and the idea of integrating and theorizing. But actually, you really don't need that. And what I mean by that is, once you just allow the dialogues to take place, the discussions and the working and the cooperation between people, they will develop a system of community. So you don't start with the metaphysics and then impose the morality. And when For King, his idea of the moral law was that it's written into the structure of the physical universe. And so right is always right, wrong is always wrong. And he did not have the capacity to engage people in dialogue. He had political objectives. And so for those people who stood in opposition to him, he did not enter with them into dialogue. So he used direct action demonstrations to force people into a negotiation with goals that he had already predetermined, King and SCLC. While considering the magnitude of the problem at that time, he did not want to negotiate or have discussions with people about whether segregation is wrong. The stakes were high, so no discussion is muted, it's closed off. But in so many instances, we're not in high-stakes situations when we are talking and conversing with people, so we don't need that type of metaphysics to impose an order, but allow the order to emerge from people's deliberations and their conversation. But if you did decide to take a metaphysical path, it might be a good way of trying to theorize, to integrate, and to bring so many different things together. But in most communities, they don't have a well-defined or explicit type of metaphysics. It's usually certain assumptions that they have, and they operate on basic assumptions, often never really tested. It's just assumed. But the idea that I suggest is that morality is really created best through an open dialogue, not suggesting what is already right or wrong. And in the course of human history, you can see how people have come up with different ways of how they decided to organize and structure their communities that appear to be quite effective for them at that given moment. If we bind to this idea of an open dialogue, then that will mean that a lot of things that we label as wrong, a lot of things that we find morally offensive, may not actually prove to be as wrong as we think they are. Once we start having a full dialogue and find out where people are in this whole process, that's if everybody is deciding to honestly and genuinely participate in a dialogue.
Yeah, final question. All right, good evening. I want to thank the panel for presenting this evening and providing us with this forum for dialogue. The question that I have is open for everyone on the panel, and it's really about the struggle that many of us face today as we're trying to fight for social justice and trying to make changes in our communities. How do we, when the successful model of the past was one of non-cooperation, breaking unjust laws and going against those who, the establishment, how do we transcend to this dialogue around cooperation and inclusiveness in an environment where inclusiveness and cooperation only produces incremental changes, very small changes for our community? So, in essence, how many times do we have these forums and we talk about the same thing over and over and over in a form of inclusivity that doesn't provide much change? How do you propose that we deal with that struggle?
Well, let me just make one quick comment on that. One is involvement in civic organizations. The church needs to be involved in voter education and voter registration and making sure everybody votes so that as many people as possible who are voting for the right candidate actually show up and vote. There is a totally different electorate 2 years ago than there was 2 months ago. 2 years ago, Democrats just slept through the election, and we didn't do so well. Last couple of months ago, we showed up, and there was a different result. In Virginia, President Obama carried Virginia 4 years ago. The very next year, there was a governor's race, where the Democrat did miserably. And if the same people had voted in the presidential election that had voted in the governor's election the following year, Barack Obama could not have won. He could not have carried the state of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we need to make sure that we vote, make sure that we cast an intelligent vote, and make sure that everybody's registered. We also need to be involved, not only the church, but also in civic organizations like the NAACP that has very intense voting records of your legislators, so you know who's talking to you would go to Washington and vote any kind of different way they want to vote to make sure that people are actually following through. You need to make sure that your local NAACP is doing the same for your city council so that you can cast intelligent votes on city council. But you have to be involved and engaged, and that's how you can make some progress.
Well, I'll say one thing, it's theological since we're a divinity school. One very important word is eschatology. To understand how change occurs, how many are anticipating graduation in May? Raise your hand. Do you know the date of the commencement?
May 10.
Let's say is it May the 10th?
May 10, yes.
There's nothing about the calendar that makes graduation take place. There's no magic in May the 10th. If change occurs, it's because people work towards it. And it's no surprise by which graduation takes place because you have done something now that leads you to that moment. The very first day, the very first week that you entered into the divinity school, you were working towards graduation, and then suddenly that moment occurs. That's the Christian idea of how change occurs. Change by nature is incremental. And even the things that we see as big and profound presuppose that somebody had done something before that particular moment. So if we are working in our churches, we're struggling in the community, and some might say, oh, it's the same problem over and over and over again. It's the same issue that's over and over again. We haven't solved it. Sometimes it takes over the course of several generations before something actually happens, that people can visibly see that it has been completed. And if we take very seriously our whole idea of being human beings as mortal beings, some things are so big they don't happen within one lifetime. And what we do represents our contribution to those who will come behind us, and hopefully they will not have as hard of a burden as we have if we will be content to work on the problem as best as we can. Now, at some moment in the future, when it comes to the full manifestation, the celebration 100 years from now couldn't take place if we did what we do right now. So if we're working, we have to give people an understanding that change is not always instantaneous. And in our culture, there's an interest and a desire to do everything quick. You gotta have everything quick. You gotta have 1 minute oatmeal. Everything has to be quick. 1 minute grits. Everything's real quick. But some things do take time. And we have to have the discipline to work with the confidence of knowing that our labor is not in vain. And the good that we can do, however small it might be, lessens the burden of those who will come behind us. But it's only when we see ourselves in the chain of life that we can be content with the opportunity that's given to us to work towards making a better world. And that's the message of Christianity. Change does occur, but it happens over time.
You might want to say, let the church say amen. Amen. Thank you, Dr. Ware. It is so fitting that you had the final word for this wonderful evening of dialogue and deliberation. So thank you for that wonderful lecture. And to all of our panelists, thank you for coming out and making a commitment to this new program here at the Divinity School. I also want to say a special thank you to Ms. Bywaters for stepping in the gap on very short notice. And even as we lift up the name of Marcia Price and continue to pray for her healing, I want to commend the way in which our student body works together and stands for one another. And they even have brought an action item to the table tonight with that student petition. So thank you for your representation. And to Mr. Slayton, thank you for coming out and reminding us of what a fine job the faculty has done with the students who come through this place. It is so good to have you represent the alumni of this Divinity School. So do go back and tell your colleagues of the good things that are happening here. And Congressman Scott, continue to do the wonderful work that you have been doing and stay connected with us. We appreciate your commitment to this Divinity School and what we're trying to do. And I appreciate that you heard the value of beloved community in the work that you're doing. So Dean Pollard, do you have any final remarks? Thank you for supporting this program, to all the faculty and students who have come out, to the community visitors and other friends of the Divinity School. Continue to walk with us on this journey as we lift up the scholarly endeavors of our colleagues here. And before we close, I do want to say a special word of thanks to those who have been in the background making this program happen. Miss Paula, Reverend Paula Hall is upstairs. She's been taping. She's set up the mics, and she has kept us on task with communicating this great event. So thank you, Reverend Hall. And also to Mr. Lindell Cooks, who has organized the facility and set up a wonderful reception for us after this talk. So I do thank my colleagues. And I want to, excuse me, is it not a wonderful reception out there? Oh, refreshments, okay. So ain't nothing like a little punch and cookies or something to hold you over till you get home. But we would not be here, friends, if it were not for Dr. Renee Harrison. And so I'm going to call out my sister. Stand up, stand up. Yes. I thank you for your vision, your fortitude, your tenacity for making this happen and for showing us that real mentoring, teaching, and learning is taking place here at the Divinity School. And this is not just a one-time only event. So look out for later in the semester when we hope to have another colloquium and even into the next academic year. So thank you for your participation with us tonight, and may God bless you as you go forward.